Hey there, beautiful soul. Welcome to Spiritual Peacock. I'm Warren, spiritual guide. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to talk through today. I'm going to kind of see what messages come through and then just deliver them as is. So I've been on my spiritual journey for some time. I've invested a lot of time into spiritual practices, understanding of various religions. I've looked at various spiritual masters. I've dived deep into understanding myself, into introspection. It hasn't been an easy journey. The journey to understanding ourselves, the journey to letting go of our attachments can somewhat seem quite violent at times. The universe, in order to help us to release fear, sets up situations that are exceptionally challenging. And at times, doubt creeps in. I've had doubt in a number of my situations where it feels like not only the instruments being used in order to facilitate the experience from an external perspective seems exceptionally harsh, but the experience itself typically comes unexpected and in the worst situations, and sometimes in what I perceive as the worst ways. It's only until I've released my attachment, released my fear to the outcomes of, well, what happens if this, or what happens if that happens, do I realize that it was all for me and not against me. You see, I asked to be awakened, and I want to understand my authentic self beyond all my subjective perspectives. I want to understand my true nature. I want to understand who I am as a being, as oneness. So in order to do that, you got to free yourself of all your conditioning. And some of that conditioning you're not even aware of. So you're trying to do this from a place of unconsciousness. You're trying to become conscious. It's not easy. It's not easy. And there's all sorts of traumas. There's all sorts of situations that come up from the depths of you that you weren't even aware of. Perhaps it wasn't even this lifetime that created it. How long have we been on this journey for? How many lifetimes? How many of those lifetimes have rolled over with the accumulation of data that you need to work through? So I understand, I really do, that this can be difficult at times. It's not easy. But I also understand that it can be incredibly rewarding. The feeling once you get something, that aha moment, once you realize that, oh, yeah, I've been holding on to this for some time. Why? I've come to realize that forgiveness, as an example, is a gift we give ourselves. It's not about the other person. It's about honoring our own beingness. Because what I understand is this. If I had a higher level of consciousness in every situation, would I not make the choice to live in a place of love, peace, happiness, no matter what was occurring in my life? Would I not give myself that gift? Why would I put myself in suffering? When I looked at it, there would be a situation that occurs, and I could probably say that we've all been there. Let's say, as an example, the situation occurred with your partner. You and your partner have got into an argument, and it typically starts over very little, and it escalates fairly quickly. Now, what you have is two unconscious beings where the egos have come into play, and they start to argue over something. And it might be serious on the grand scale of things when you really look at it, how much is actually serious. But let's say they perceive it as serious at the time, and it goes in all sorts of directions. And eventually, you have a spider web of what the original argument started at has escalated into or gone into 100 different directions. So what happens is that the argument quickly erupts. Feelings are hurt, resentment builds, anger is generated, frustration. And if you have two stubborn people, they'll hold their ground, perhaps not even talk to each other again. But at some point, somebody will overpower the other, and somebody will admit or submit. So what happens in that situation is the one submitting submits with all sorts of conditions that they don't say out loud. The other one is expecting an apology, an amends to be made. And they want it done in a very particular way. See, because the ego wants to shame. The ego firstly wants to hold on, and then the ego wants to shame. So it occurred to me, how do I become conscious in that situation? How do I become conscious before I react in a way that is damaging and hurtful towards me? Forget the other person, right? Because I understand if I can react in a particular way, that no matter the actions of the other person, I can at least remove my own suffering. And hopefully, over time, I can be a light unto myself. I can then help others also understand, or at least be an example for others to understand that they could do the same for themselves. So I dived into trying to understand how do I become aware at the right moments. What I came to is that it's very difficult to become aware during the process. Because typically what happens is that somebody says something, you get a feeling about it, your feeling then transfers to your mind attaches a story to it, and then you react in an unconscious way. So how do I become aware once the feeling creeps in? So I started to analyze the situations afterwards, and I'll tell you some other practices that I do in order to cultivate awareness. But I started to look at every situation the moment I became aware of it. And this might be afterwards where I've sat in dissatisfaction, right? Resentment, anger for 3 days, where I've been pissed off with the world, angry at the people within it. And typically I realized that what started the argument to begin with is not why I'm dissatisfied. There were other elements in my life that triggered that event that I hadn't dealt with. Elements from my past, elements from my current situation, etc. So I started to analyze, what could I have done differently in that particular situation, regardless of what the other person had said, regardless of my feelings or my judgments of the other person. What could I have done differently? And I quickly noticed that there was always a higher vibrational option available. There was always a better choice that was available to me. So I replayed that entire situation in my head, and I replayed the feeling of what it would feel like if I took that higher vibration. And what would the outcome look like? Not for them, not for the way they react, but the way I responded to it. And I would go through the scenario of it. What I also recognized is that as much as I'm conditioned to respond in a particular way, so is the other person. And their response to me, or to their situation, or to their life, and the way they perceive it, is based on their own programming, their own conditioning, and their own suffering. And so I went to a place of compassion for myself and compassion for the other people involved, or the other person involved, or the situation itself. And the moment I went to compassion, I could forgive myself for my actions, and I could accept that part of myself that responded in a ugly way, should you say. I also forgave the other person in that and the situation itself. So the more I did this, the more I was able to cultivate awareness. So at some point in time, the space between me sitting in unconscious suffering became shorter and shorter. And eventually, there came a situation where I didn't respond at all. I responded in the way that I had been envisioning my responses within my mind, and I didn't react at all. And it occurred to me that I had done that, and that I could always do that. And that was a pivotal change in my own journey, particularly the way I see the world. And it allowed some balancing to take place, some balancing of energies, because I realized at that moment that I had accepted parts of myself that I had been denying or blaming. Because typically what happens in a situation is that you get into an argument with somebody, and you then blame the other person for why you responded or reacted or took action in the particular way that you did. They made you do this. In other words, they had a remote to your inner being, and they turned on a switch that made you act in a robotic way, and they the cause of it, and therefore they to blame. And I realized that that wasn't the case at all. So I started to make more higher vibrational choices for myself. Not perfect, because I think a question of perfect is a subjective one, but it certainly was more loving towards myself, and therefore more loving to the outside world. Because you see, unless you can change within, you can then respond outwardly in the way you feel inside. The other practices that I did alongside it, when I first started to begin, I looked at my mind, and I sat down in meditation, and I sat down and I would sit in meditation, and my mind would just constantly go. In fact, I would lie in bed and my mind would just constantly go. I'd be taking over the world, or I'd be worrying about a particular situation, or I'd be dreaming about a different scenario in my life. And I'd be strategizing and planning and seeing how I can manipulate and all of those type of energies. And so I began to meditate. And when I began to meditate, my mind would run in all sorts of directions. I didn't quite understand the point of meditation. And when I first began to meditate, it didn't make sense to me. And in fact, I thought I couldn't do it, truthfully. But I'm quite a persistent individual. So I thought, well, all these spiritual masters are talking about meditation, sitting in observation. So there must be some truth to it. They can't all be wrong. So I sat in meditation, and I persisted with it, and I gave myself a goal that I'm going to, every day, if I could do it twice a day, even better. I'm going to sit in meditation for twice a day, and I'm going to go through the process. So you sit in meditation and your mind goes in every direction. And I use the meditation of breath, right? Focusing on a single point, watching my breath go in and watching my breath go out. Watching my breath go in, watching my breath go out. Bringing my awareness to a single point of focus within my beingness. And it wouldn't be too long. This would happen for about 30 seconds if I'm lucky, with no thought in mind. But I was so focused on my breath, and I don't know, 3-4 minutes later, I've gone on a thought train. And when my thought train concluded, I'm meditating. Oh, back to my breath. And then I'd go through 10 seconds and I'll be on another thought train. And this had been my experience, right? So I didn't think at the time that this was productive. I certainly wasn't aware of the awareness, busy being aware of all of this transpiring. And after some time, I became aware that my focus on my breath had expanded to a minute, and eventually to 2 minutes. And my thought train, I became aware of these thought trains I was jumping on and traveling with. And eventually, I became aware of the silence between the thoughts. And my focus on my breath became longer and longer. And then there came a day, after really diving into this, where I noticed my thoughts, the silence in between my thoughts had become very long, and that I was aware of my sensations. When a thought came in, I was aware of the thought. I wasn't jumping on the train. I was aware of the thought passing, as if I was watching cars in traffic just come and go. I was aware of my sensations. I had lost track of time. And that there was a sensation, a feeling that came with that, an expansiveness that came with it. And I noticed that I had cultivated awareness, that I was not my thoughts, because if I was my thoughts, then when my thought arose within me and disappeared back within the awareness, that I would disappear. I realized that my emotions, I could not be my emotions, although I identify with my emotions. So when you become angry, you become a different person, as they say. And I certainly noticed that was the truth. Or when you're sad, you become the sadness. And when you're happy, you become the happiness. And I recognize that I'm neither of my emotions either, because my emotions come and go, and I'm not aware of them. I recognized that I was the awareness that sat in it. So one of the things that I did with it is I dived into the practice of gratitude. I realized once I was observing my thoughts that I didn't quite like the chatter that was going on in my mind. And it was certainly self-defeating, that I was against myself. And if I had awareness, why would I do that? Why would I be against me? In fact, I'm the only one that can be for me. And so what I did is I started to reprogram my thinking patterns. And I did this through gratitudes and prayer, right? Gratitude's about all the different things that I was grateful for in this world. And I'd write them down on a daily basis. And then I'd pray. I'd pray for humanity. I'd pray for all my past situations. I'd pray for people in suffering now, myself in suffering. And I would ask for their highest vibration, my highest vibration, the earth's highest vibrations to come into play, and for an expansion of consciousness to erupt in this experience. So I started to reprogram myself into a higher vibrational state of consciousness, along with expanding my awareness. I also, in order to stop my thought, I use mantra as a single point of focus. I got a mantra that I would use as a continual point of focus throughout the day. And what I noticed is that this became a lifestyle, not just a nice to have in my life, that it was a necessity. And the more I drove down this path, the more I dived deeper and deeper into the understanding of, or wanting to understand who I was. So I recommend those practices, particularly when you wake up or when you go to bed. The more you can do them, the better, the more impact they'll have on your journey. And forgive yourself sometimes, right? Be patient with yourself. Love yourself. Because that's what we've come here to do, right? Who else is going to do it? Who else is going to love you unconditionally? All parts of you. Who else is going to love you in your totality? The good, the bad, and the ugly. It's you. That's you.